Commander Zeth Kaler adjusted his crystalline teaching interface and surveyed the mixed species classroom at the Galactic Military Academy. Representatives from 47 different worlds sat in neat rows, their various forms of attention focused on the holographic battlefield projection hovering above his desk. Insectoid Vractari clicked their mandibles thoughtfully, while the gelatinous Moldari pulsed with different colors as they processed tactical information. At the back of the room, 12 humans sat in complete silence. This troubled Zeth Kaler more than he cared to admit. In his 300 years of teaching advanced combat strategy, he had never encountered students quite like the humans. Every other species participated eagerly in tactical discussions. The Kethmori would argue passionately about fleet formations. The crystalline Silnathi would project complex mathematical models of battle scenarios. Even the notoriously shy whisperfolk would at least communicate through their telepathic translators. But the humans just watched. And listened. And said nothing. Today we will examine the Battle of Kepler's Ridge, Zeth Kaler announced, his forearms manipulating the holographic controls with practiced ease. This engagement between the hegemony forces and the rebellious Outer Rim coalition represents a textbook example of superior technology overcoming numerical disadvantages. The battle scene materialized in stunning detail. Massive hegemony dreadnoughts, each the size of a small city, faced off against a swarm of smaller coalition vessels. Energy beams lanced through space as the larger ships methodically destroyed their opponents with overwhelming firepower. A young Vractari named Kliktar raised one of her 6 arms. Instructor, the coalition had nearly 4 times as many ships. How did they lose so decisively? Excellent question, Zeth Kaler replied, highlighting various aspects of the battle. The hegemony vessels possessed quantum pulse shields that could absorb tremendous amounts of damage. Their plasma cannons could destroy multiple enemy ships with each shot. Superior technology made numbers irrelevant. Several students nodded their understanding. The bat-like Nixhari fluttered their wings in agreement. A Moldari student pulsed bright blue to indicate comprehension. The humans remained silent. Can anyone identify tactical alternatives the coalition might have employed? Zeth Kaler asked, genuinely hoping one of the human students might finally participate. A Silnathi student projected a geometric pattern that translated as, they could have concentrated fire on single targets to overwhelm individual shields. They might have used kamikaze attacks to break through the defensive lines, suggested a Kethmori cadet, his scaled head crest flaring with excitement. The suggestions continued for several minutes. Each idea was analyzed and found wanting against the superior hegemony technology. The fundamental lesson remained clear: advanced weapons and defenses would always triumph over primitive tactics and inferior equipment. Throughout the discussion, Zeth Kaler found his attention repeatedly drawn to the human section. They sat with perfect posture, their binocular eyes tracking every detail of the battle simulation. Occasionally one would make a brief note on their data tablets, but they never spoke, never asked questions, never offered suggestions. It was deeply unsettling. Very well, Zeth Kaler concluded as the class period neared its end. For tomorrow's assignment, you will each prepare a tactical analysis of a historical battle from your homeworld. Show how the principles we've discussed apply to your species' military development. As students began filing out, chattering excitedly about their assignments, the humans gathered their materials in perfect coordination. Like a well-oiled machine, they stood simultaneously and moved toward the exit in a loose formation that somehow managed to keep them all mutually supporting while appearing completely casual. Cadet Richardson, Zeth Kaler called out, stopping one of the humans near the door. The human turned with crisp precision. She was young by human standards, perhaps 25 standard years, with brown hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail and alert green eyes. Yes, sir? You've been attending my classes for 6 weeks now. I notice you and your fellow humans rarely participate in discussions. Is there something about my teaching methods you find unsuitable? Richardson's expression remained perfectly neutral. No, sir. Your instruction is very thorough and informative. Then, why don't you contribute to tactical discussions? Surely humans have fought wars. You must have opinions about strategy and combat. We do have military history, sir, Richardson replied carefully. We're just here to learn from other species' experiences. Something in her tone suggested there was much more she wasn't saying, but before Zeth Kaler could probe further, she had rejoined her group and they were gone, moving with that same casual but coordinated precision. That evening, Zeth Kaler sat in his private office reviewing student files. The humans' academic records were exemplary. Perfect attendance, high marks on all examinations, flawless performance in physical training exercises. Their psychological evaluation showed them to be stable, intelligent, and highly motivated. But there was something else. A note in their files indicated that human combat records were classified at levels far above Zeth Kaler's security clearance. This struck him as odd. Most species were eager to share their military achievements. The Kethmori had provided detailed accounts of their conquest of 17 star systems. The Vraktari had submitted extensive documentation of their hive wars. Even the pacifist Moldari had offered historical analyses of their defensive conflicts. But human combat data was locked away behind security protocols that suggested, what? What could be so sensitive about the military history of a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel? 3 days later, during a lesson on siege warfare, Zeth Kaler decided to test his human students more directly. He presented the classic scenario of the siege of Antares Prime, where hegemony forces had spent 8 months slowly grinding down the defenders' will to fight through systematic bombardment and blockade. The key to successful siege operations, he explained, is patience and overwhelming resource advantage. The defenders had limited supplies and no hope of relief. Victory was inevitable. He watched the humans carefully as he spoke. Their faces remained impassive, but he noticed something interesting. Several of them exchanged glances that lasted perhaps half a second too long. Quick eye movements that seemed to communicate entire conversations in moments. "Cadet Torres," he said suddenly, addressing one of the human males. "What is your assessment of this tactical situation?" Torres, a stocky man with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes, stood smoothly. "Sir, the hegemony forces executed a textbook siege. Superior firepower, adequate supply lines, and patience led to inevitable victory." "And if you were commanding the defenders?" Torres paused for exactly 2 seconds. "I would surrender when the situation became hopeless, sir. Minimize casualties and preserve lives." "A wise decision," Zeth Kaler agreed, though something in Torres's tone suggested he was choosing his words very carefully. "Anyone else have thoughts on siege defense?" The non-human students offered various suggestions. Build deeper bunkers. Attempt to break the blockade with desperate sorties. Send covert teams to sabotage the besiegers' supply lines. All textbook responses that Zeth Kaler had heard countless times before. The humans said nothing. After class, Zeth Kaler approached his colleague, Professor Vexmari, who taught military engineering to the same group of students. "The humans in our shared classes," Zeth Kaler began without preamble. "Do they participate in your instruction?" Vexmari's tentacled head swayed in what passed for a shrug among her species. "They are attentive students. They ask practical questions about equipment specifications, logistics requirements, communication protocols. But they rarely offer opinions on design philosophy or tactical applications. Have you noticed anything unusual about them?" Define unusual. Zeth Kaler considered his words carefully. "They seem to learn everything we teach them, but they act as though they already know it. As though our lessons simply confirm knowledge they already possess." Vexmari's primary tentacle curled thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it, yes. Last week I was demonstrating the principles of defensive fortification. Most students take extensive notes when learning new concepts. The humans barely wrote anything down, but their test scores were perfect." "Do you think they're hiding something?" "Most certainly," Vexmari replied without hesitation. "The question is what and why." That night, Zeth Kaler made a decision that would change everything. Using his instructor's security clearance, he began researching human military history. What he found in the unrestricted files was straightforward enough. Humans had indeed fought wars among themselves for thousands of years before developing space travel. Their conflicts appeared to follow standard patterns: disputes over resources, territory, and ideological differences. But the more he read, the more questions arose. Human warfare seemed unusually brutal by galactic standards. Most civilized species developed beyond the need for total war once they achieved technological sophistication. Yet humans had continued fighting each other with increasing destructiveness right up until they made contact with the galactic community. Even more puzzling were the gaps in the historical record. Entire sections of human military development were simply missing from the accessible databases. References to specific battles, weapons systems, and strategic doctrines were redacted or classified. Why would a newly spacefaring species have military secrets worth hiding from their galactic neighbors? The next morning brought an unexpected opportunity for answers. Admiral Krenthocht, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Force, was visiting the Academy to observe advanced training exercises. As luck would have it, Zeth Kaler's tactical analysis class had been selected to present their work to the distinguished visitor. The students filed into the main auditorium, where Admiral Krenthocht sat in the front row. His massive Kethmori frame dominated the space, scales shifting color slightly as he evaluated each presentation. One by one, students from various species presented historical battles from their homeworlds, analyzing tactics and strategies according to the principles they had learned. The presentations were competent but predictable. Young Vraktari showed hive conflicts where superior coordination defeated individual prowess. Silnathi demonstrated mathematical optimization of resource allocation in territorial disputes. Moldari described defensive strategies that emphasized survival over victory. Then came the humans. Cadet Richardson stepped forward with the same precise movements Zeth Kaler had noticed before. Admiral, honored instructors, fellow cadets. Today I will present an analysis of a conflict from human history known as the Battle of Stalingrad. The holographic display activated, showing a vast urban landscape covered in snow and wreathed in smoke. Buildings lay in ruins, their skeletal remains reaching toward a gray sky. In the distance, massive armies faced each other across a frozen river. The engagement lasted 200 days, Richardson continued in a calm, professional tone. Two major powers committed over 2 million soldiers to fighting for control of a single city. The attacking force possessed superior equipment, extensive combat experience, and initial numerical advantages. Admiral Krenthocht leaned forward with interest. This sounded like a conventional siege scenario. However, Richardson continued, the defenders employed tactics that ultimately proved decisive. The display zoomed in to show soldiers fighting in the rubble-strewn streets. Rather than attempting to hold fortified positions, human defenders adapted their strategy to the urban environment. They turned every building into a fortress, every street into a killing ground. The images that followed were unlike anything Zeth Kaler had seen in his centuries of military study. Soldiers moving through bombed-out buildings like ghosts, appearing suddenly, to attack enemy positions before vanishing again. Sniper teams operating from concealed positions, picking off targets with mechanical precision. Small units conducting raids that caused damage far beyond their apparent capabilities. The defenders used a strategy they called Rattenkrieg, Richardson explained. Rat warfare. They abandoned conventional tactical thinking and made the enemy fight for every room, every hallway, every staircase. The attackers' technological advantages became meaningless in close-quarters urban combat. Admiral Krenthocht's scales had shifted to a deep purple that indicated intense concentration. What were the casualty figures for this engagement? Approximately 800,000 military deaths on the attacking side, Richardson replied without emotion. 600,000 for the defenders. An additional 40,000 civilian casualties. A stunned silence filled the auditorium. Those numbers represented the entire population of some smaller worlds. And this was considered a victory for the defenders, the admiral asked. Yes, sir. The attacking force was completely destroyed as an effective military unit. The outcome shifted the strategic balance of the entire global conflict. Richardson continued her presentation for another 10 minutes, detailing tactical innovations that seemed to emerge spontaneously from the crucible of urban warfare. Soldiers learning to move through cities like they had been born in the ruins. Commanders adapting their strategies hour by hour as situations changed. An entire army transforming itself into something new and terrible in response to immediate necessity. When she finished, the auditorium remained silent for long moments. Cadet Richardson, Admiral Krenthocht said finally, this tactical analysis is illuminating. Tell me, how typical is this battle in human military history? Another of those momentary pauses that suggested careful consideration of words. Sir, it represents one example of human adaptive capacity in warfare. Our species has a documented tendency to develop new tactical approaches when faced with superior opposing forces. I see. The Admiral's scales had shifted to an orange pattern that Zeth Kaler recognized as deep thoughtfulness. And, these tactical innovations, are they still part of human military doctrine? Human military doctrine continues to emphasize adaptability and tactical flexibility, sir, Richardson replied with perfect diplomatic neutrality. As the presentation ended and students filed out for the next exercise, Zethkaler noticed Admiral Krenthok speaking quietly with several academy administrators. Their conversation appeared urgent, and he caught fragments that mentioned security protocols and classified assessments. That evening, Zethkaler received an unexpected message on his secure communication terminal. Admiral Krenthok was requesting a private meeting to discuss concerns regarding human tactical capabilities and their implications for galactic security. As he prepared for the meeting, Zethkaler found himself wondering what exactly his silent human students had been hiding. Richardson's presentation had revealed tactical thinking that seemed almost alien in its brutal efficiency. The willingness to accept such massive casualties, the ability to adapt so completely to changing circumstances, the transformation of an entire city into a weapon. What kind of species developed military capabilities like that? And, more importantly, what were they really doing at the Galactic Military Academy? The answers, he suspected, were about to change everything he thought he knew about warfare, about tactics, and about the newest members of the galactic community. Admiral Krenthok's private office aboard the orbital defense station overlooked the Academy campus below. Through the massive viewing portal, Zethkaler could see students moving between buildings in orderly groups, their various species creating colorful patterns across the manicured grounds. It was peaceful, civilized, everything the Galactic Military Academy represented about the evolved nature of modern warfare. Professor, what I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels, the Admiral began, his massive frame casting a shadow across the room. The information exists on a need-to-know basis, and, after today's presentation, you clearly need to know. Zethkaler activated his personal security protocols and waited. 6 months ago, when humans first applied to join the Galactic Defense Force, we conducted standard evaluations of their military capabilities. The results were concerning. Admiral Krenthok manipulated a holographic interface, and a series of documents appeared in the air between them. These are excerpts from human military records that they provided during the application process. The first document detailed something called Operation Overlord, apparently the largest amphibious invasion in human history. The numbers were staggering. Over 150,000 troops landing simultaneously on hostile shores, supported by thousands of ships and aircraft. But, it wasn't the scale that caught Zethkaler's attention, it was the complexity of coordination required. They launched this operation using only radio communication and mechanical computing devices, Admiral Krenthok explained. No quantum entanglement networks, no crystalline processing matrices. Primitive technology by our standards, yet they coordinated movements across hundreds of kilometers with precision that would challenge our modern systems. The next document describes something called the Tet Offensive. Human forces scattered across an entire planet, simultaneously attacking hundreds of targets during a religious holiday when their enemies expected peace. The tactical audacity was breathtaking. This operation involved over 80,000 soldiers conducting coordinated attacks across multiple continents, the Admiral continued. They maintained operational security so completely that their enemies had no advance warning despite monitoring communications and having extensive intelligence networks. Document after document revealed similar patterns. Humans seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to organize complex military operations with limited resources. More troubling was their consistent willingness to accept casualties that other species would consider unacceptable. The Battle of Gettysburg, Admiral Krenthok highlighted another file. 51,000 casualties in 3 days. Both sides continued fighting despite losses that should have broken any rational military force. These numbers. Zethkaler struggled to process the implications. They're treating their own people as expendable resources. That was our initial assessment, the Admiral agreed. But, continued study revealed something more complex. Humans don't treat their soldiers as expendable, they treat achieving objectives as more important than preserving individual lives. There's a subtle but crucial difference. The Admiral opened another file, this one marked with security warnings. This is where things become truly concerning. These documents detail human tactical innovations developed during what they call asymmetric warfare. What followed challenged every assumption Zethkaler had about civilized military conduct. Humans had developed methods of warfare that seemed designed to terrorize enemies into surrender. They created weapons specifically intended to maim rather than kill, calculating that wounded enemies required more resources than dead ones. They studied enemy psychology and designed tactics to exploit specific fears and cultural weaknesses. They call it psychological warfare, Admiral Krenthok explained. Humans systematically research their enemies' mental vulnerabilities and design operations to cause maximum psychological damage with minimal physical force. One particular document described an operation where human forces had convinced an entire enemy army to surrender by making them believe they were surrounded by superior forces. In reality, fewer than 100 human soldiers had used deception, misdirection, and expert knowledge of enemy psychology to neutralize thousands of opponents without firing a shot. This level of tactical thinking. Zethkaler paused, trying to find appropriate words. It suggests they view warfare as a science to be studied and perfected. Precisely. And this brings us to why your human students remain silent in class. Admiral Krenthok activated a new display showing Academy surveillance footage. We've been monitoring their behavior since they arrived. Watch this. The footage showed the human students during their free time. Away from the classroom, they were not silent at all. They gathered in small groups and engaged in intense discussions, but their conversations were carefully controlled. They used hand signals, body positioning, and even subtle changes in posture to communicate complex ideas without speaking. They're maintaining operational security, Zethkaler realized. Even here, among allies, they're protecting information. More than that, the Admiral replied grimly. Intelligence analysis suggests they're studying us. Every lecture, every tactical discussion, every training exercise, they're gathering information about galactic military capabilities and methods. The surveillance footage shifted to show humans during physical training exercises. While other species performed competently, the humans moved with a precision and efficiency that seemed almost choreographed. Every movement served a purpose. Every action supported their teammates. They transformed individual exercises into opportunities to practice small unit coordination. They're not just students, Zethkaler said slowly. They're intelligence operatives. We believe so, yes. The question is whether this represents a threat to galactic security or simply standard human military preparation. Admiral Krenthok opened one final file, this one carrying the highest security classifications. This is what convinced the Defense Council to permit humans to attend the Academy despite our concerns. The document contained a single battle report from Earth's recent history. Something called the Six-Day War. Human forces acting as advisors to a smaller allied nation had faced armies equipped with modern galactic standard weapons provided by hostile powers. The technological disparity should have made victory impossible. Instead, the human-advised forces had achieved complete victory in less than a week. How? Zethkaler asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They ignored conventional tactical doctrine entirely, Admiral Krenthok explained. While their enemies prepared for traditional warfare using superior equipment, the humans created an entirely new form of combat. They combined air power, armor, and infantry in ways that had never been attempted. They moved faster than their enemies could react, struck where they were weakest, and exploited success so aggressively that resistance collapsed before it could organize. The battle report included detailed analysis by galactic military experts who had studied the engagement. Their conclusion was unanimous: human tactical innovations had rendered conventional warfare obsolete. Every major power in the galaxy would need to completely redesign their military doctrine to account for human methods. This is why they're here, Zethkaler understood finally. They're not learning our tactics, they're teaching us that our tactics are inadequate. The Defense Council reached a similar conclusion. Better to have humans studying our methods inside the Academy than developing counter-strategies in isolation. Admiral Krenthok's scale shifted to deep orange, indicating profound concern. But there's something else. Something we discovered only recently. A new display activated, showing intercepted communications from the human homeworld. The messages were heavily encrypted, but portions had been decoded by the Galactic Intelligence Services. These are orders to the human students from their military command, the Admiral explained. They're not just gathering intelligence on current galactic military capabilities. They're specifically studying our weaknesses, our blind spots, our assumptions about warfare. The decoded fragments painted a disturbing picture. Human military planners were systematically analyzing every aspect of galactic civilization, looking for vulnerabilities that could be exploited in potential conflicts. They studied economic systems, political structures, technological dependencies, and cultural values with the same methodical approach they applied to battlefield tactics. "They're preparing for war," Seth Kaler said quietly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they're simply being thorough. Human history suggests they prefer to be over-prepared rather than caught off guard." Admiral Krenthaucht manipulated the display again, showing tactical assessments that made Seth Kaler's blood run cold. Human analysts had identified critical weaknesses in every major galactic power. The hegemony's reliance on quantum pulse shields could be neutralized by coordinated attacks using specific frequency modulations. Kethmori fleet formations were vulnerable to fast-moving strike craft operating in particular attack patterns. Vraktari hive minds could be disrupted by targeting specific communication nodes with precise electromagnetic warfare. How long have they known about these vulnerabilities? Seth Kaler asked. Based on the timestamps in these communications, they identified most of these weaknesses within their first month at the Academy, Admiral Krenthaucht replied. They've spent the subsequent time developing countermeasures and attack strategies. The full scope of human military thinking was becoming clear. They didn't just study warfare, they approached it as an all-encompassing system that included technology, psychology, economics, politics, and culture. Every interaction with galactic civilization was an opportunity to gather intelligence that could prove useful in future conflicts. "Sir," Seth Kaler said carefully, "should we be allowing them to continue their studies? If they're gathering intelligence for potential hostile action." "That's the dilemma," Admiral Krenthaucht replied. "Removing them from the Academy would confirm that we consider them a threat, potentially triggering the very conflict we're trying to avoid. But, allowing them to continue provides them with even more intelligence about our capabilities." The Admiral activated one more display, showing a comprehensive analysis of human military potential based on historical data and observed capabilities. The conclusions were stark. In a direct military confrontation, humans would likely achieve victory against any individual galactic power within 6 months. Against a coalition of galactic powers, they could maintain defensive operations indefinitely while systematically weakening their enemies through asymmetric warfare. "Their advantages aren't technological," Admiral Krenthaucht explained. "They're tactical, strategic, and psychological. They think about warfare in ways that we simply don't. They're willing to accept costs we wouldn't consider. Most importantly, they adapt to changing circumstances faster than our military systems can respond." "What do we do?" Seth Kaler asked. "We continue observing. We learn everything we can about human methods. And we hope that their presence in the galactic community represents genuine peaceful intentions rather than preparation for eventual conquest." The meeting concluded with Admiral Krenthaucht providing Seth Kaler with new security protocols and observation requirements. From now on, every interaction with human students would be monitored and analyzed. Every question they asked, every exercise they performed, every casual conversation would be scrutinized for intelligence value. As Seth Kaler returned to his quarters, he found himself seeing his human students in an entirely different light. Their silence in class wasn't shyness or disrespect, it was operational discipline. Their perfect coordination wasn't natural talent, it was military training applied to academic environments. Their polite demeanor wasn't cultural inclination, it was a carefully maintained cover for intelligence-gathering operations. Tomorrow's lesson would cover naval warfare tactics used during the Centauri Rebellion. He wondered what human military history would reveal about their naval capabilities. More importantly, he wondered what information they would gather about galactic fleet operations and what plans they might develop for neutralizing those capabilities. The humans had been silent in class, but their silence was speaking volumes about their true nature. The question now was whether the galactic community was prepared for what that silence really meant. That night, as he reviewed his lesson plans for the following day, Seth Kaler made a decision. He would continue teaching as before, but he would also begin his own intelligence-gathering operation. If humans were studying galactic military capabilities, then galactic instructors needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. The next day's lesson would be more than academic instruction. It would be the beginning of a careful game of military intelligence, with the future of galactic security hanging in the balance. And, somewhere in the student dormitories, 12 humans were preparing for tomorrow's class with the same methodical precision they brought to everything else. They would continue to listen, to learn, and to remain silent. But now their instructors knew that silence was not empty. It was full of plans, preparations, and possibilities that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of warfare forever. The real education was about to begin. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would change everything. As Zeth Kaler prepared for his naval warfare lecture, an urgent message appeared on his personal communicator. Admiral Krenthocht was requesting all Academy instructors to attend an emergency briefing before classes began. The faculty gathering in Conference Room Alpha included representatives from every department. Professor Vexmari tentacled nervously beside the holographic warfare specialists. The crystalline Silnathi mathematics instructors hummed at frequencies indicating high stress. Even the normally unflappable Moldari psychology professors were pulsing rapid color changes. Last night, we intercepted communications that require immediate attention, Admiral Krenthocht began without preamble. A holographic display activated, showing decoded transmissions from the human homeworld. These messages reveal that human military command has escalated their intelligence gathering operation. The decoded fragments were more extensive than the previous intercepts, and their content was deeply disturbing. Human analysts had not only identified vulnerabilities in galactic military systems, they had begun developing specific battle plans for exploiting those weaknesses. Operation Prometheus, Admiral Krenthocht highlighted one particular document. A comprehensive strategy for neutralizing galactic defense networks using coordinated electromagnetic warfare, psychological operations, and rapid strike tactics. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Humans had identified that galactic military systems relied heavily on quantum communication networks and crystalline processing cores. By simultaneously targeting these critical nodes with precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses, they could cripple entire fleet command structures in minutes. The timing would be crucial, the Admiral continued, showing tactical timelines. Human analysis suggests they could achieve strategic surprise by exploiting what they call bureaucratic lag time, the delay between when galactic forces detect an attack and when they can authorize response measures. Professor Vexmari raised a tentacle. Admiral, how could they possibly coordinate such an operation across multiple star systems? The logistics alone would require. That's the truly concerning part, Admiral Krenthocht replied, activating another display. They've studied our administrative and command protocols extensively. They know exactly how long each species takes to reach tactical decisions, how our alliance structures function, and where our coordination systems are most vulnerable. The human plan exploited every bureaucratic weakness in galactic civilization. While hegemony forces waited for authorization from their High Council, human strike teams would have already neutralized key installations. While Kethmori fleets maneuvered into traditional battle formations, human forces would have disappeared after achieving their objectives. Most disturbing is this, Admiral Krenthocht showed a section marked Phase 3. After neutralizing our ability to coordinate defense, they would begin what they call liberation operations. Zeth Kaler studied the tactical outline with growing horror. Humans wouldn't attempt to conquer galactic worlds through traditional occupation. Instead, they would infiltrate local populations, identify groups dissatisfied with current governments, and provide them with training and equipment to overthrow their own leaders. They're not planning invasion, he realized. They're planning revolution. Precisely. And our intelligence suggests they've already begun preliminary operations. A new display showed surveillance footage from various academy locations. The images appeared normal at first, students moving between buildings, attending meals, participating in recreational activities. But enhanced analysis revealed something extraordinary. The human students weren't just gathering intelligence on military systems. They were building detailed psychological profiles of every other student in their classes. They knew which Vraktari were dissatisfied with hive authority structures. They had identified Moldari who questioned their species' pacifist philosophy. They had located Kethmori who resented their rigid caste systems. They're recruiting, Professor Vexmari whispered, her tentacles curling with anxiety. Not recruiting, Admiral Krenthocht corrected. Cataloging. They're creating databases of potential allies for future operations. The scope of human intelligence gathering was staggering. They had compiled comprehensive files on Academy personnel, including personal histories, family relationships, financial situations, and psychological vulnerabilities. They knew which instructors were frustrated with academic politics, which administrators harbored grudges against superior officers, which support staff felt underappreciated by the academy hierarchy. Sir, Zethkaler said carefully, this level of intelligence preparation, it suggests they've been planning these operations since before they applied to join the galactic community.
Our analysis reaches the same conclusion, Admiral Krenthocht replied grimly. Human contact with galactic civilization wasn't accidental discovery.
It was a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation designed to gather information for eventual military action.
The briefing continued for another hour, revealing layer after layer of human planning and preparation.
They had studied galactic economic systems and identified critical resource dependencies. They understood political relationships between different species and knew which alliances were strong versus which existed only on paper. They had even analyzed galactic cultural values and developed propaganda strategies tailored to each species' psychological makeup. What are your recommendations? Asked Professor Silthera, the Whisper Folk instructor whose telepathic abilities made her particularly valuable for psychological assessment.
Admiral Krenthocht's scales shifted to deep purple, indicating maximum stress levels.
The Defense Council has authorized several response options, but each carries significant risks. The first option was immediate expulsion of all human students and suspension of diplomatic relations with Earth. This would prevent further intelligence gathering but would also confirm human suspicions about galactic intentions, potentially triggering the very conflict they were trying to avoid. The second option involved covert surveillance and counterintelligence operations designed to feed false information to human operatives. This approach carried the risk of discovery, which would have even more serious diplomatic consequences. The third option was the most disturbing, preemptive military action against human installations before they could implement their operational plans.
There is one additional possibility, Admiral Krenthocht continued.
We could attempt to turn this situation to our advantage by engaging humans in direct negotiation about their concerns and intentions.
Negotiation?
Zethkaler asked.
With infiltrators and intelligence operatives? Consider their position, the Admiral replied thoughtfully.
Humans are a young species entering a galactic community dominated by powers with millions of years of technological development. From their perspective, gathering intelligence and preparing for potential conflicts isn't aggressive behavior, it's prudent survival strategy. This perspective shift was unsettling but logical.
If galactic powers had approached Earth with hidden agendas or hostile intentions, human military preparation would represent reasonable defensive measures rather than aggressive planning. What do we know about actual human intentions?
Professor Vexmari asked. That's the critical question, Admiral Krenthocht admitted. Their operational plans appear designed for rapid victory in potential conflicts, but they also include extensive provisions for minimizing civilian casualties and preserving critical infrastructure.
This suggests they view warfare as a tool for achieving political objectives rather than an end in itself.
The briefing concluded with new security protocols and observation requirements.
All Academy personnel would maintain normal interactions with human students while carefully monitoring their behavior for additional intelligence activities.
Faculty members were instructed to introduce subtle variations in their instruction to test human knowledge and reactions. Most importantly, they would begin implementing a counter that advanced tactical exercise chamber was unlike any classroom facility at the Academy. Located 3 levels below ground in the Academy's most secure section, it could generate completely realistic battlefield environments using hard-light projections and gravitational field manipulation. Every major military engagement in galactic history had been recreated here for analysis and training. Today, it would host the most important test in the Academy's 3-century history. Admiral Krenthocht stood in the observation gallery overlooking the exercise chamber, surrounded by senior faculty and several officials from the Galactic Defense Council who had arrived overnight. The stakes of this demonstration had escalated far beyond academic evaluation. The future relationship between humanity and galactic civilization might depend on what happened in the next few hours. Participants, prepare for exercise initialization, the automated system announced as 24 students filed into the chamber. 12 humans moved with their characteristic coordinated precision, while 12 representatives from other species took positions according to standard Academy protocols. Today's scenario will test integrated multi-species tactical coordination, Zethkaler announced through the communication system. You are facing a theoretical enemy force with significant technological advantages and superior numbers. Your objective is to prevent them from capturing the strategic facilities on planet Caridian 5. The hard light projections activated, creating a fully realized planetary environment around the students.
Rolling hills covered with alien vegetation stretched to the horizon, broken by 3 major urban centers connected by transportation networks.
In orbit above, enemy fleets were beginning their assault while invasion forces prepared to land.
"This is a standard Academy exercise," Professor Vexmari whispered to Admiral Krenthaucht. "We've run variations of this scenario dozens of times."
Conventional tactics suggest the defending forces should establish fortified positions around each urban center and attempt to hold them against overwhelming enemy assault.
But the humans weren't following conventional tactics.
Within moments of the scenario beginning, the human students had spread across the virtual battlefield in a pattern that defied every principle of defensive warfare taught at the Academy. Instead of concentrating their forces around strategic objectives, they were moving away from the cities entirely.
"What are they doing?" asked Counselor Threnmoth, a senior hegemony official whose crystalline form pulsed with confused energy patterns.
Cadet Richardson, apparently designated as the human team leader, was coordinating with the other species representatives through rapid gestures and brief verbal exchanges. But her primary focus was on a holographic display that showed terrain analysis far more detailed than the standard tactical overlay provided by the exercise system. "They're not using our tactical software," Seth Kaler realized with surprise. "They've created their own analysis programs." Indeed, the human students were operating with battlefield intelligence capabilities that exceeded anything available to regular Academy students. Their displays showed detailed topographical analysis, enemy force composition estimates, probable landing zones, and projected movement patterns, all generated in real time from basic sensor data.
"How did they develop software like that?" Admiral Krenthaucht asked.
"Sir," interrupted the exercise coordinator, a Vraktari technician monitoring the simulation systems, "I'm detecting unauthorized data processing. The human students appear to be running advanced algorithms on our training computers."
The implications were staggering.
Humans had not only analyzed galactic computer systems well enough to understand their capabilities, they had also developed software improvements that enhanced performance beyond original specifications. They had been quietly upgrading Academy systems during their training.
On the battlefield below, the human strategy was becoming apparent.
Rather than defending the cities directly, they were establishing observation posts on elevated terrain that provided comprehensive surveillance of all possible enemy approach routes. Small teams were positioning themselves along transportation networks, but not to hold defensive lines. They were creating mobile harassment units that could strike enemy forces and disappear before retaliation. "They're turning the entire planet into a surveillance network," Professor Vexmari observed with growing amazement. "Every human position can observe and report on enemy movements while remaining concealed from detection." Cadet Martinez was working with a Kethmori student to establish what appeared to be supply depots, but their locations made no tactical sense according to conventional doctrine. Instead of placing supplies near defensive positions, they were hiding resource caches in seemingly random locations across the planetary surface.
"Why are they distributing supplies like that?" Counselor Threnmoth asked.
The answer became clear when the simulated enemy forces began their assault. Instead of massing their defenses around static targets, the humans had created a defensive network that could operate independently for extended periods. Each team had access to multiple supply caches and could move between positions without losing logistical support.
More remarkably, they had integrated the non-human students into this network in ways that maximized each species' natural capabilities.
The Vraktari students were using their natural coordination abilities to manage communication networks.
Kethmori students were employing their aggressive nature for rapid strike operations.
Even Moldari students were contributing through their analytical capabilities, providing real-time assessment of enemy tactical patterns. "They're not just using our students as allies," Admiral Krenthaucht realized. "They're amplifying our capabilities through superior coordination and tactical planning." The enemy assault progressed according to standard invasion doctrine. Landing forces secured beachheads and began advancing toward the urban centers, expecting to face concentrated defensive forces around each city.
Instead, they encountered something unprecedented in galactic military history.
The human defensive network activated like an immune system responding to infection. Enemy forces found themselves under observation from the moment they landed, their movements tracked and reported throughout the defensive network. When they advanced along expected routes, they faced precisely coordinated ambushes that appeared from nowhere and disappeared before they could respond. The enemy commanders can't develop effective counter-strategies because they can't predict where the next attack will come from, Zethkaler observed.
The humans have created a defensive system that operates on principles the enemy doesn't understand.
More disturbing from the enemy perspective was that their technological advantages were being systematically neutralized. Advanced enemy sensors could locate individual defensive positions, but destroying those positions didn't significantly impact the overall defensive network.
The humans had created redundancy at every level. When enemy forces finally reached the urban centers, they discovered that the cities themselves had been transformed into elaborate traps. Rather than fortifying the cities against attack, the humans had prepared them for controlled demolition. Critical infrastructure, transportation networks, and resource facilities could be destroyed instantly if capture became inevitable. They're not trying to hold territory, Admiral Krenthok said slowly.
They're making territory worthless to capture. The exercise continued for another 2 hours, but the outcome was already clear. Despite overwhelming technological and numerical superiority, the enemy forces were being ground down by an opponent they couldn't effectively engage. Their losses mounted steadily while the defensive network remained intact and operational.
Finally, Cadet Richardson activated the communication system.
Exercise controllers, we request permission to demonstrate Phase 2 operations.
Phase 2? Zethkaler asked through the communication channel. Sir, we've been operating under purely defensive constraints. In actual combat situations, human doctrine calls for transitioning to offensive operations once enemy forces are sufficiently weakened. Admiral Krenthok exchanged glances with the Defense Council observers. Permission granted.
What followed challenged every assumption about the relationship between offensive and defensive warfare. The human teams, which had spent hours apparently retreating and hiding, suddenly revealed that they had been systematically positioning themselves for coordinated assault operations. Using intelligence gathered during the defensive phase, they launched simultaneous attacks against enemy command centers, supply lines, and communication networks. The same mobility and coordination that had made them impossible to pin down during defensive operations now made them devastatingly effective attackers.
They've been planning the offensive phase since the exercise began, Professor Vexmari whispered. Every defensive position was chosen to support eventual attack operations.
The enemy forces, already weakened by hours of attrition warfare, collapsed completely under coordinated assault.
Within 30 minutes, the humans had captured enemy commanders, secured critical objectives, and established control over the entire planetary surface. Exercise complete, Richardson announced. All objectives secured, enemy command structure neutralized, infrastructure damage minimized. The observation gallery fell silent as the hard light projections faded and normal lighting returned.
24 students stood in the empty exercise chamber, but they had just demonstrated tactical capabilities that exceeded anything in the Academy's teaching curriculum.
Cadet Richardson, Admiral Krenthok's voice carried over the communication system. Report to the observation gallery immediately.
As the students filed out, the Defense Council observers engaged in urgent discussions. What they had witnessed wasn't just superior tactical thinking, it represented a completely different philosophy of warfare that rendered conventional galactic military doctrine obsolete. Admiral, Counselor Threnmoth said grimly, these capabilities represent a potential threat to every power in the galactic community. If humans can neutralize technological advantages so effectively, then we need to understand their intentions very clearly, Admiral Krenthok agreed. And we need to understand them quickly. Richardson entered the observation gallery with the same precise movements that had characterized all human behavior at the Academy. But her expression suggested she understood the significance of what had just occurred.
Cadet, Admiral Krenthok began without preamble, what you've demonstrated represents military capabilities far beyond what humanity disclosed during initial contact protocols. Why were these capabilities concealed?
Richardson stood at attention, but her response was carefully considered. Sir, humanity doesn't consider these capabilities unusual or threatening. From our perspective, we demonstrated standard small unit tactics adapted to available resources and terrain conditions.
Standard tactics? Counselor Threnmotha's crystalline form pulsed with disbelief. You neutralized a technologically superior enemy using methods that don't exist in any galactic military doctrine.
Respectfully, sir, that observation illustrates exactly why humanity requested admission to this academy, Richardson replied.
Our tactical methods evolved in isolation.
We need to understand how our capabilities can be integrated with galactic systems rather than operating independently.
And, if integration proves impossible? Admiral Krenthok asked.
Richardson paused, and, for a moment her diplomatic composure slipped slightly. Sir, humanity has no interest in conflict with galactic powers. But, we also have no interest in being conquered or subjugated by powers that don't understand our capabilities.
We're here to learn how to coexist peacefully and contribute to galactic security. What guarantees can you provide that human capabilities won't be used against galactic interests?
The same guarantees that galactic powers provide to each other, Richardson answered. Mutual respect, shared interests, and the understanding that conflict benefits no one. The discussion continued for another hour, with Defense Council observers asking detailed questions about human military doctrine, capabilities, and intentions.
Richardson answered with careful honesty, revealing enough information to demonstrate transparency while maintaining appropriate operational security. But, the fundamental question remained unanswered: could galactic civilization integrate a species whose military capabilities made them potentially dominant partners rather than junior members?
As the meeting concluded, Admiral Krenthok made a decision that would reshape galactic military policy.
Cadet Richardson, I'm authorizing expanded cooperation between human students and galactic defense forces.
You will participate in advanced training programs with access to current operational intelligence and strategic planning systems. Sir, Richardson replied, humanity would be honored to contribute to galactic security efforts. Understand that this cooperation comes with expectations, the Admiral continued. Human capabilities will be subject to oversight and integration with existing command structures. You will not operate independently or outside established protocols. Acknowledged, sir.
We look forward to working within galactic systems rather than around them.
As Richardson departed, Zethkaler found himself wondering whether what they had just witnessed represented the beginning of a new era of galactic cooperation or the first step toward human dominance of galactic civilization. The humans had finally spoken, and their words were both reassuring and terrifying. They claimed to seek integration, but they had demonstrated capabilities that made them the most formidable military force in galactic history. The silence in his classroom was about to end, but what would replace it remained uncertain. Tomorrow's lessons would be very different, with students who might know more about warfare than their instructors and whose true test scores were measured in the defeat of entire enemy fleets.
The Academy's mission had always been preparing students for galactic defense.
Now it faced the challenge of preparing galactic civilization for its most dangerous and capable defenders. 6 months after the demonstration that changed everything, Zethkaler stood in his transformed classroom watching the most unusual military briefing in galactic history. The sterile academic environment had been replaced with active command facilities, complete with real-time tactical displays, quantum communication networks, and direct links to Defense Force operational centers throughout the galaxy. The students assembled before him represented a new model of military cooperation that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Human cadets worked seamlessly alongside their galactic counterparts, not as junior partners learning from superior civilizations, but as equal contributors to a genuinely integrated defense network. Current Situation Report, Commander Richardson announced her promotion to instructor rank, reflecting humanity's new status within galactic military structure. She activated the main tactical display, showing a three-dimensional map of the contested Outer Rim territories where actual combat operations were underway. The Kethmori hegemony was facing its first serious military challenge in 3 centuries. A coalition of previously unknown species had emerged from unexplored regions beyond the Galactic Rim, equipped with technology that matched or exceeded current galactic standards.
More troubling, these new arrivals seemed immune to traditional diplomatic solutions and showed no interest in peaceful coexistence.
The Devourers, as they had been designated by galactic intelligence, operated according to principles that defied conventional understanding.
They didn't seek territory, resources, or political advantage.
They seemed interested only in eliminating other forms of intelligent life entirely. Enemy fleet composition indicates technological capabilities equivalent to our own, reported Cadet Vexmari the Younger, daughter of Zethkaler's colleague and one of the top tactical analysts in her class.
However, their operational patterns suggest fundamentally different strategic thinking.
The tactical display showed Devourer movements that made no sense according to standard military doctrine. They ignored strategically valuable targets, bypassed resource-rich systems, and concentrated their attacks on heavily populated worlds with minimal military value.
Traditional galactic strategy emphasized controlling key systems and supply lines.
The Devourers seemed interested only in maximizing casualties among civilian populations. Initial response by conventional galactic forces has been inadequate, Commander Richardson continued diplomatically.
Standard fleet engagement tactics prove ineffective against enemies who don't follow expected operational patterns.
This was a considerable understatement.
3 major galactic fleets had been destroyed or severely damaged in the first month of fighting.
The Devourers used kamikaze tactics that sacrificed their own ships to cause maximum damage to enemy forces. They employed biological weapons that targeted specific species' physiologies. Most disturbing, they seemed to possess detailed intelligence about galactic military capabilities and had developed specific countermeasures for every conventional tactical approach. Which brings us to today's operational planning session, Zeth Kaler announced, activating additional security protocols. You are about to participate in developing actual battle strategies for use in current combat operations.
The implications were staggering.
6 months ago, these students had been attending academic lectures on historical conflicts.
Now they were being asked to develop tactics for the most serious military crisis in galactic history.
Cadet Martinez, Commander Richardson called, "Present your analysis of Devourer operational patterns." Martinez stood and activated his personal tactical display, showing movement patterns compiled from dozens of enemy engagements. The Devourers operate according to what human military doctrine would classify as total war principles. They make no distinction between military and civilian targets, show no concern for their own casualties, and demonstrate willingness to sacrifice long-term strategic advantages for immediate tactical gains. How do we counter such an approach? Asked Cadet Kliktar, her Vraktari mandibles clicking with anxiety. Traditional galactic strategy assumes rational opponents with understandable objectives, Martinez replied. The Devourers don't appear to be rational by our standards. They're more like a natural disaster than a conventional military force. Which means we need to adapt our tactical thinking to address an entirely different type of threat, Commander Richardson added. Human military history includes extensive experience with enemies who employed similar methods. The next 2 hours involved detailed analysis of historical human conflicts where conventional military forces had faced opponents using total war tactics. The students studied everything from ancient siege warfare to asymmetric guerrilla campaigns, looking for principles that could be adapted to current galactic circumstances. The key insight, explained Cadet Thompson, another human student, is that you can't defeat total war tactics using limited war methods. If the enemy is willing to accept unlimited casualties and ignore conventional strategic objectives, you have to change the fundamental nature of the conflict.
Meaning? Cadet Pulmarin asked, her Moldari coloration shifting to worried purple.
You make the cost of total war higher than the enemy can sustain, Thompson replied.
Human doctrine calls this escalation dominance. You demonstrate that you can inflict more damage than they can, and you're willing to do it. The concept was profoundly disturbing to most non-human students. Galactic civilization had moved beyond total war centuries ago. The idea of deliberately escalating conflicts to force enemy surrender challenged fundamental assumptions about civilized behavior. But, there's another option, Commander Richardson interjected. Human military theory also includes principles for what we call conflict termination through strategic impossibility. You make the enemy's objectives literally unachievable regardless of their tactical methods. She activated a new tactical display showing proposed defensive modifications for threatened galactic worlds. Instead of concentrating defensive forces around strategic targets, the new approach involved distributed defense networks that could deny the Devourers their primary objective, massive civilian casualties. We can't prevent them from attacking civilian populations, she explained, but we can prevent them from succeeding. Evacuation protocols, underground shelter systems, mobile defense networks, and rapid response capabilities can minimize casualties even when we can't stop initial attacks. The strategic implications were revolutionary.
Rather than fighting to preserve territory or destroy enemy forces, galactic defenders would focus on preserving lives and maintaining civilization's continuity. The Devourers could capture systems, but they wouldn't achieve their goal of eliminating galactic populations. Combined with aggressive counterattacks against Devourer bases and supply lines, Commander Richardson continued, this approach makes their strategic objectives unattainable while minimizing our own losses.
Cadet Silthara, the young Whisper folk student whose telepathic abilities made her particularly valuable for intelligence analysis, raised a concern.
This strategy requires coordination across multiple species and political jurisdictions.
Can galactic governments implement such complex defensive modifications quickly enough?
That's where human organizational capabilities become crucial, Commander Richardson replied. Human military doctrine emphasizes rapid implementation of complex operational plans across diverse command structures. Over the following weeks, the integrated student teams worked to develop detailed implementation plans for the new defensive strategy. Human students provided expertise in rapid organizational change and complex logistics. Galactic students contributed knowledge of local conditions, political structures, and technological capabilities.
The results exceeded everyone's expectations.
Within 2 months, modified defensive networks were operational throughout the threatened sectors. When the Devourers launched their next major offensive, they encountered organized resistance unlike anything in their previous experience. Instead of vulnerable civilian populations, they found hardened shelter systems and mobile evacuation protocols that minimized casualties. Instead of static military targets they could overwhelm with superior numbers, they faced adaptive defense networks that constantly shifted to counter their tactics. Most importantly, they discovered that their attacks were being countered by rapid response forces that included the most dangerous opponents they had yet encountered, human military advisors working with galactic defense forces. The Battle of Kepler Station demonstrated the new paradigm in action. When Devourer forces attacked the system, expecting to find typical galactic defensive preparations, they instead encountered something unprecedented.
The station itself had been evacuated and transformed into an elaborate trap.
When enemy forces moved in to destroy it, they found themselves facing coordinated attacks from concealed human-advised units that had been positioned throughout the system. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Devourer assault fleet. The enemy is adapting to our new tactics, Cadet Richardson reported during the post-battle analysis. Intelligence suggests they're developing countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize human tactical methods.
Which means we need to continue adapting ourselves, Zethkaler replied. This is no longer an academic exercise. You are developing tactics for an ongoing war. The following months brought a series of engagements that established new principles for galactic warfare.
Human tactical innovations, integrated with galactic technological capabilities and diverse species' natural abilities, created military systems that were both more effective and more humane than anything previously achieved. The Devourers found themselves facing an opponent that could match their tactical flexibility while maintaining the technological and logistical advantages of galactic civilization. More importantly, they were fighting enemies who understood total war tactics and could employ them more effectively than the Devourers themselves. The turning point came when human-advised forces launched Operation Prometheus, the same strategy that had originally terrified galactic intelligence services. But, instead of targeting galactic worlds, it was directed against Devourer command and control systems throughout the contested regions. Using precisely coordinated electromagnetic warfare, psychological operations, and rapid strike tactics, the operation achieved something thought impossible. It forced the Devourers to retreat from galactic space entirely. They withdrew because their strategic objectives became unattainable, Commander Richardson explained during the final briefing.
We didn't defeat them through superior firepower or tactics. We defeated them by making their approach to warfare ineffective. The aftermath of the Devourer War transformed galactic civilization in ways that extended far beyond military policy. The integration of human tactical thinking with galactic technological capabilities had created new possibilities for both warfare and peaceful cooperation. Professor, Cadet Kliktar asked during one of the last formal classes of the academic year, why did humans remain silent for so long? Why not share these capabilities immediately?
Zethkaler considered the question carefully before responding.
Because they understood something that we didn't.
Military capabilities without trust and mutual understanding are threats rather than assets. They needed to learn our systems and values before we could safely learn theirs. The silence had been broken, but it had been replaced by something better, genuine communication between species that understood both the power and responsibility that came with advanced military capabilities. As the academic year concluded, Zethkaler found himself teaching a new curriculum that combined galactic military history with human tactical innovation. His students included representatives from species throughout galactic civilization, all working together to develop defense strategies for a galaxy that had become both more dangerous and more secure. The humans were no longer silent in his classroom. They spoke freely, shared their knowledge openly, and worked as equal partners with their galactic colleagues. The transformation had been remarkable, but it had also revealed something important about the nature of military education.
The best military instruction didn't come from teaching students what to think.
It came from teaching them how to think, how to adapt, and how to work together in facing challenges that no single species could address alone.
The instructors had wondered why humans stayed silent in class. Now they understood that sometimes silence wasn't about hiding knowledge, it was about waiting for the right moment to share it responsibly.
In the end, that patience had made all the difference between conquest and cooperation, between fear and trust, between isolation and integration. The galaxy was safer not because humans had remained silent, but because they had chosen to break that silence at precisely the right moment and in exactly the right way.
The lessons learned in that transformed classroom would influence galactic military doctrine for centuries to come.
But, more importantly, they had demonstrated that even the most dangerous capabilities could become the foundation for peace when wielded by species committed to mutual understanding and shared security. The humans had finally spoken, and the galaxy had listened. What they heard was not the voice of conquerors, but of protectors who understood that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to preserve and defend what truly matters.